We've got a panel here today, and our goal is to talk about the early days of Bitcoin. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I do think, in fact, I know, and most people in this room know that cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are absolutely revolutionary technology. Many of you are familiar with the origins. Some of you are not. Even if you are, I think it's helpful to go back and constantly reminisce about the origins, because I think the origins are significant. I think the technology was built for a particular purpose, and we can't fully understand that purpose, I think, without understanding the beginnings of the technology. So with that, I'll ask each member of the panel here to just introduce themselves, and we'll start with Nehemia. And Nehemia, just introduce yourself and talk a little bit maybe about how you became involved with Bitcoin, when that was, and how that came to be.
Okay, my name is Nehemia Kramer. I come from Israel and to study in Drexel in '96, and then have my career. And by 2008, I thought I'm a successful guy. But then crisis just wiped all of my all of my money, and I had children in private schools, and that was a terrible time. And I end up actually working with mixed martial art with fighters. And during this my work, unavoidably, you have to go to Silk Road to buy, different medicine, which is did not approved by authorities here in the United States. And I encounter with this BTC, I was supposed to buy some peptides, and I was supposed to pay 18 BTC. And that was pivot moment in my basically destiny, because instead of put what is BTC in Google, I actually put how can I buy BTC. And apparently I was supposed to just go to CVS, give money to the cashier, the alimony people actually giving, and spell my email. So, which is I did. I gave $100 to the cashier. I come back upstairs, put my computer, and here I have 97 BTC, which is very nice. So I start to kind of watch that. And
what was it worth then,
97 cents.
97 cents.
Yeah. And when it's kick 12, then I actually read Satoshi white paper, and I understand these guys, which is basically almost destroy me, we can do without them. We can do without them much better. So I decided I have something. Maybe I have to buy Bitcoin, and I bought it. I bought by that time 3,000 Bitcoins, and since I kind of my life became a little bit better and better. Again, don't take me wrong. I actually sell all of them for $1,300 each, and make a killing. So Bitcoins, which is I have now, I bought for $300, $400, $2,000. So, but anyway, it was good start for me, and this time period between my first 97-cent Bitcoin and my first $12 Bitcoin, I befriended with some guy. I can name them, but he was editor of Satoshi white paper. And then I first time got exposed to the ideology, which is I definitely partially share, especially on an emotional level. So the end of story is that I was lucky to be in one of the first rounds, or pre-rounds of pre-sale of Ethereum because of just personal connection. And I think that time I'm the only one, in this kind of small group of people, mostly Buterin's relatives and close friends, I actually have, but that time, Bitcoins, and I know, I mean, obviously I didn't know it will be so great, but yeah, I have some knowledge what I'm doing.
And so, Ryan, I think you may have gotten involved even a little before Nehemia as part of the cypherpunk.
Yes. Otherwise, I cannot buy 97 cents Bitcoin.
That's right. So you want to
No CVS.
Yeah, I got involved in Bitcoin before there was Bitcoin. So there was all the Cypherpunks mailing list stuff that happened in the 1990s. I was 13 years old and signed up to the mailing list and was participating and saw a bunch of the things that came before Bitcoin, Hashcash, Mixmaster remailers, all the things that Cypherpunks mailing list, all sorts of networks that we're going to build with anonymous digital currency. Worked on Chaumian token stuff. I lived in the Caribbean island of Anguilla working on that to get around the ITAR restrictions and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And then I rediscovered Bitcoin when I discovered Bitcoin when the mailing list I was on had the white paper on it. And I was super anti-Bitcoin for the first 2 or 3 years because it doesn't have any privacy. And so I did not buy any 97-cent Bitcoin. I got my Bitcoin at a somewhat higher price. And yeah, but I've been involved in crypto stuff ever since then.
Fantastic. David?
Sure. David Namdar, everyone. So yeah, I think this is always important to kind of take a trip back to the beginning of kind of Bitcoin in the early days because that it kind of shapes, and we're only going to be hearing more and more stories and movies coming out about like a lot of the things that happened back then. So I got my start in the industry. I came from the hedge fund world. I was at UBS in Hong Kong and at Millennium in New York, and because I was exposed to the idea of multiple currencies, it kind of opened my eyes to the idea of a currency born from the internet that wasn't just created or manipulated or controlled by a group of like older central bankers. And I started going to all the Bitcoin meetups in New York when it was a room, 20 people in size, and it was mostly some of the geekiest technologists, people from the poker industry, people that were buying it on Silk Road, like a lot of like the different like people that were attracted to it from all different areas, but at the same time like came together and all saw the power and potential of Bitcoin. And then Sean and I actually, I'm sitting and replacing Charlie Shrem, who's a dear old friend of mine and Sean's as well. And because of, a lot of the, I guess, my participation in the space, I have to thank some of my earliest friends in the space, like Charlie, like Jonathan Mohan, a lot of the earliest participants in the New York and Miami and San Francisco kind of Bitcoin scenes. And they were guys that were in it not because of the money and not like what you see a lot today. Really, it's like very different than what it was early on. Early on, it were people that were just fascinated by the technology, that were still trying to transact in Bitcoin when it was just on the command line, and everyone was just trying to figure out, and dream up all of the things we're seeing today. And so it's been, pretty exciting to see through the different cycles. Pretty much everything has been kind of all the innovation we see today and in the last cycle in 17, 18 were things that were dreamed up and envisioned in 2011, 12, 13, and just as we get to different points, each kind of cycle, we're seeing a lot more of the earliest ideas actually be put into work.
So Ryan, you mentioned the cypherpunks, and I think this is different than the cyberpunks. The cyberpunks is a genre of literature, but the cypherpunks were, of course, instrumental in developing Bitcoin, and there was a certain ethos, a certain mentality that was driving the development of it, perhaps best summarized in the Cypherpunk Manifesto. So you want to share a little bit about that? What was sort of the motivations behind Bitcoin? What were the cypherpunks trying to achieve exactly?
Sure. Yeah, back in the period before like 1999 or so, crypto was very heavily regulated by the government. It was treated as a munition, and if you wanted to export crypto from the United States, incorporate it in any product, you had to have State Department or Department of Commerce or DoD permission to do so. And that made it really hard to develop open source software in the United States. So the fundamental idea of the cypherpunks is that code is law, crypto is freedom, and that you'd be able to implement whatever you wanted to do under the First Amendment as free speech or as a universal principle of free speech and build the world that you wanted to see. People went to great lengths of civil disobedience, like writing the controlled algorithms on T-shirts and walking across the border with them, claiming that was an export. I moved to the Caribbean island of Anguilla, where I would write an academic paper, and somebody sitting next to me that was not a U.S. citizen would download the paper and implement it. People printed the source code of PGP, one of the first good accessible encryption algorithms, in books, and they transported them physically to the Netherlands and scanned them in, and they go and compile from that. So all sorts of stuff like that to try to enhance individual liberty. So it's a long trend of things from Milton Friedman, Hayek, Rothbard, all sorts of individual philosophers implemented in code, and this wasn't really purely a technical thing. It was more an ideological thing where the technologies happened to be there at the right time to make it possible to implement these philosophical ideas.
Yeah, there are several motivating factors behind the cypherpunk movement, but I think the general theme is that these being smart people and technology-focused people, I think they realize that their libertarian, crypto-anarchist sort of ideals were never going to win at the ballot box. The game theory of the current system was just never going to permit that to happen. And so they devoted themselves to changing those game theory incentives. And they realized that if they could develop the right technologies, that it could basically subvert the existing system and encourage voluntary adoption of these new technologies that would, in fact, move us forward or more toward a more libertarian society, one in which central authorities and central intermediaries had much less control, dominance, and influence. So, for those who don't know the history, that's a little bit of it, and I think it's important to always remember where that came from. So let's get, now that we have that history, we've only got a minute or so left, so let's get real quick into, and we might run this a little bit over, but let's get real quick into Bitcoin itself. The publication of the Bitcoin white paper, written by a hacker pseudonym, Satoshi Nakamoto. Don't say who, but do any of you guys have strong suspicions about who Satoshi is? Or they, or he, or she?
Not Craig Wright. No.
I think the biggest question is whether it's an individual or a group. The set of individuals that would have all the skills, like there's nothing in the white paper that's really that difficult in any one domain. What's really exceptional about it is that it's very good in multiple dimensions. It's technology, it's philosophy, it's economics, it's game theory, everything else, all in one paper. So if that's one person, there's a pretty small set of people that could be. If it's a group of people, it's a much larger potential pool. The issue is if it was one person, I could see them keeping secrecy for this length of time. If it was a group of people, I really don't think they would have been able to maintain the level of secrecy they've had.
Well, it's because, again, I know a gentleman who claims to be editor of Satoshi white paper. It was previously at least three this kind of papers. I conclude that it's a group of people, and why it still keep secret, because two of these people dead.
Yeah, I don't know. I think now the question probably becomes whether we're ever going to find out. And I think the important thing, like there's a kind of theme now in crypto that we're all Satoshi. And it's, when you look at the origin stories of any religion, right, a lot of times you have these kind of visionary leaders, sometimes that have, that are known, sometimes that aren't known, and then everybody kind of builds the stories around them. And so that's kind of what's happened within the whole cryptocurrency space, in that the dreaming and the thinking about who Satoshi could be makes us all feel like we're a part of it and leaves a lot open to interpretation. And so I think that's kind of the important aspect of it.
Agreed very much. One more question, and or maybe two quick ones. You mentioned, Ryan, that there wasn't anything. It required the white paper required a background in a lot of different areas, but most of the pieces of the puzzle existed prior to Bitcoin, if I'm not mistaken, from a technology perspective and even a philosophy perspective. I've heard somebody say that the only real true innovation in Bitcoin, other than how those pieces were put together, was perhaps the difficulty adjustment. Do you agree with that? Would you say that was the primary innovation, or were there other things that you would highlight also?
Yeah, I think definitely the adoption curve of incentivizing people to mine early, hold on to it, and then promote the system was the key innovation. There's a few other technical innovations that are important, but what you can do functionally with Bitcoin is something that you could have done with things that existed 10, 15 years before in a larger network. You could have either a bunch of separate servers or one network that's connected, and their market mechanisms would have solved the other way. So the real innovation was getting it adopted through this curve.
And last question, 30 seconds for each of you. If you have to look forward into the future, Bitcoin is a thing now. There's no putting genie back in the bottle. It's obviously inspired lots of other developments, lots of other protocols. But if you had to think about the future significance of Bitcoin and blockchain in general, 30 seconds is not much time to explain that, I know. But each of you, 30 seconds, where do you think this is all going?
I still have Bitcoin since 2011 and hopefully another all of my life. I was holding significant amount of Ethers, not anymore.
I think there's going to be a dramatic change in how the entire economy works to use more decentralized systems. I don't necessarily know if any current crypto is going to be the thing that changes it. It does seem kind of crazy that people that were early Bitcoin holders are going to end up controlling the entire economy just by virtue of being early Bitcoin holders. I think existing assets are going to move and they're just going to be on chain, but they're not going to be necessarily tied to these things. But economic activity as a whole is going to move to these kind of tokenized systems. The most interesting thing is think about what the world would be like today if we hadn't had these systems and how different it would be and how kind of hopeless it would be right now.
So I think, there's been a lot of criticism always around the energy and efficiency of Bitcoin mining and a lot of other aspects of it, and really people have been trying to attack it from all different angles. And I think as I forecast ahead of like how the world's going to play out over the next decade and next century, I think we're going to continue to see Bitcoin as a catalyst for driving change and innovation, the same way that Bitcoin mining drove innovation in chip design that eventually will lead us towards a more energy efficient future. So I think it's going to face a lot of resistance as it continues to grow, but I think Bitcoin's success is almost an inevitability from here.
All right. I want to thank you guys. It's a real privilege to have been able to have this conversation with you. I admire all of you.
Thank you, Sean.
And
Thank you.
Looking forward to the rest of the conference.